Welcome to Truth or Trend, episode 32.
Woo.
We've been talking about all these biohacking experts out there talking about all of the things that they do. One of the things that we decided today we had to cover was Brian Johnston, the guy leading the longevity, right, a conversation, the don't die movement.
Mhm.
His number one most important thing that he says over and over again is, Dr. V, sleep.
Sleep.
Yes, good quality. And that
Yes.
is where we agree with him, right?
Right.
Absolutely. And, not everywhere else, the full sunlight thing, as you mentioned, which
Right.
ironically would mess with his sleep. So we thought today we would dedicate a whole episode to talking about the importance of sleep, getting good quality sleep, and then what your sleep, just like the headaches Dr. V talks about, what is it telling you about your life and your health when you are waking up at a certain time at night, or if you're having a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep. We're going to go through all of that awesome detail today. And there's a
Yes.
cool study that just came out that we were just reviewing here. This was in June of 2025, and it highlights here that 172 diseases are associated with sleep traits. So again, one of the things I always want to tell people, if you're chasing symptoms, if you're using a drug for this or that or the other thing, it's very likely, well, and I'm going to say this just boldly, anytime you're on a medication, you're compensating for something you're not doing right for your health, right? There's something
Great
you
statement.
either you're not getting enough nutrition, enough exercise, but sleep, I would say, is a massive pillar to that as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Dr. B, how'd you sleep last night?
I slept great. Thanks for asking. Yes, it is a great measurement. It's a great tool. In fact, as you're, looking at that study and you let the cat out of the bag, the three questions for me regarding sleep is how did you fall asleep? How fast did you fall asleep? Or are you waking up at a random time? Or is it the same time of night that you're waking up every time? So I would, break that study into those three aspects because each of those are going to have their own health consequences if that is the reason you're not sleeping well,
Yeah.
right? And that's
Well,
really where we want to go down the road is and learn from what our sleep is telling us ultimately, right? Mhm.
let's go down that road. Let's start with not falling asleep at night. Let's start there, right? And
Um,
and just to be clear, I know that most of us probably aren't perfect with our sleep habits,
of
and
course,
that mess it up.
right.
It's my intention to be asleep by 10 o'clock every night because I understand that's some of the most powerful sleep between 10 p.m. and midnight, right? So it's my goal.
Right,
When I give
right.
people that goal, and then they tell me, "Yeah, but Dustin, I laid there in bed staring at the ceiling for an hour." So where do we start? Where do we go next with that person who can't fall asleep?
For me, I'm looking at excitotoxins,
Okay.
so if I go out to dinner, for example, and I lay there, staring at the ceiling, solving the problems of the world, that tells me that something in that meal had MSG, or they used a derivative of MSG or glutamate in the seasoning, most likely, of the meal that they presented, that they prepared. And so I'm either not going back to that restaurant or I'm going to try something different when I eat that. And the challenge with the excitotoxins, these MSG, monosodium glutamate, the glutamate is a neurotoxin. In other words, it excites brain cells, nerve cells to the point of death. And the brain is all nerve cells, obviously. So that's where we're basically stimulated. It's the same mechanism of post traumatic stress, PTSD. It's the same mechanism of concussions where, the person's overexcited constantly. And that is actually cell death that's taking place. That's the scary part. Speaking of your 118, what'd you say, thousand diseases or something? The consequences of poor sleep. So if we're not falling asleep and those nerve cells are firing too much, it's a fairly similar mechanism often for tinnitus, leading to one of our upcoming podcasts on hearing.
Mm.
But tinnitus is often a neurodegeneration issue as well. So we need to help look at what it takes to ultimately that excitotoxin, that glutamate needs to convert to GABA to turn off the brain. Ultimately, that's the mechanism where we stop thinking about all the problems of the world and go into that peaceful, restful state, which GABA is the primary inhibitory brain chemical. GABA stands for GABA aminobutyric acid, isn't relevant, everything, but knows it as GABA. But again, that is the primary calming brain chemical. We need to convert that GABA to, excuse me, that glutamate to GABA so that we can shut it off and go to sleep. So when that mechanism is compromised in one way or another, from a post-concussion, from monosodium glutamate, that, then we have issues falling asleep.
So I think where this is really, really relevant in clinical practice and asking questions, some people have a hard time going to sleep every night. But then it's
Right.
mysterious for some people who, no, I fell asleep fine 3 nights this week, but then one night I couldn't fall asleep. It's so weird, right? I think that's
Right.
when you start to look at what they ate that day and whether they got glutamated, right? Too
True
much,
story. Right,
right?
right, right. Hmm.
And so when I'm sitting there with somebody who that I feel like that's a case, and of course for muscle testers, we're going to test for the excitotoxin point. Can you help them out with that?
Yeah,
Right.
so it's right on the pec margin, right on the outside of the both sides, right at the center of the pec margin. There is the
And
excitatory neurotransmitter
and if that
point.
shows up as their primary, then we want to help them support the glutamate to GABA conversions as much as
And
possible.
magnesium, wouldn't you know, is one of the things that helps do that.
Bingo. Yeah. So easy mag for the brain mag is specifically one of my favorites for that.
Right.
Very helpful. And of course, if they ate a high MSG diet, if they were eating at Chick-fil-A, like the people that I do here, there's zero magnesium in that food. So clearly,
Right, right.
balance that, but that makes logical sense as well. Another thing that I reach for is honestly lithium orotate, right? So something
Nice.
like great minds with lithium because it has shown to help reduce excess glutamate in the brain, to reduce that, well, and clear it into the glial cells to get an option to be able to even be converted into GABA, right? Because we need all the nutrients to help be able to convert it to GABA. We have to get it right out of the
Mm-hmm.
synapse in the first place. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's just way too much. That that's a person like we say who's thinking too fast or talking too fast, or their brain's just doing a million things at night.
Right. And so lithium's beautiful there. That's a great point. And people also probably, we need to have the discussion of the hidden sources of that glutamate, because unfortunately, often in the fermentation process, glutamate is a liberated byproduct. So that's where the soy sauce falls short, unfortunately. People ask about, do I eat sushi and things like that? Raw fish, theoretically, yes, it's a great source of omega-3s and so on. But the soy sauce is where that meal would fall short. And so if you're saying, well, I don't want the sodium, so that you do low sodium soy sauce that has more glutamate because they're using more MSG to compensate for the lack of salt in it. And so what I would do as an antidote instead is understanding that here's another discussion that we need to have about sleep, is parasites. But the best antidote against parasites is wasabi. Some of the companies I use actually sells wasabi-based supplements as part of their anti-parasitic protocol. So I use lemon juice I squeeze lemon and then mix the wasabi in with the lemon juice, and that's what I dip my sushi in. That way I kill parasites on contact. I get the wasabi into the system to help kill any parasites that I would get with that, and I'm not getting that neurotoxin of the soy sauce. So soy sauce, even things like curry. Curry is a wonderful spice. We talk about, it's all over the health literature, but if it's improperly processed and kind of fermented, some curry will stimulate my brain and have me awake at night periodically. But other curry tastes great and work, and I don't have that mechanism. Even all the way down to, there's a list on my website of get these out of your kitchen, is what I titled the page. Um, but even all the way down to protein powders. If the protein powder, whey protein isolate or soy protein isolate, in the isolation process, if it's done improperly, then there will be excitotoxins. There will be that excitatory reaction in the brain. Not all are bad like that. I call it about 50%. Some test okay, and do not do that to us, and they're very beneficial. Other protein powders can actually even be a brain killer, if you will. Are you looking up that page?
Looking at your website right now. I'm trying to find this for everybody to see this. Get these out of your kitchen list.
So look at the wow, where is it?
On there somewhere. A lot of great
Try
resources.
more. There should be patient resources there. Patient resources,
Huh? There you go.
click, and then there we go. How to use newsletter, international links. Yeah, there should be a link on there. Kinesiology. Let's see, effects.
Well, there's
There
a
should
lot.
be,
Here's
yeah,
the excitotoxin
yeah,
list. Where
yeah, yeah. Yep.
So yeah, this
That
is
should be
great.
it. Mhm.
Cool. Excellent. Yeah, we got to keep people connected to this kind of stuff because soy sauce is one of those ones that I think that a lot of times people don't even think about. But what else is on the
Right.
list from your memory right now? That would be something that you
Yeah,
like.
at the bottom of the list is artificial sweeteners.
Okay.
Yeah, again, same mechanism. It's a brain killer. Those when you're eating too many artificial sweeteners, which usually is going to be gum, breath mints, things like that,
Uh,
that will create a weakness of the quads on both sides because of its adverse effect on the small intestine. And so the people that you see that wear those straps underneath the kneecap when they run, that is a person that's doing too many artificial sweeteners in what they're consuming. So it creates that knee pain. I
okay.
had some buddies that I ride with that were chewing gum to keep their sinuses open. So that's a whole nother, we'll do another podcast on sinuses, I guess. But
Uh-huh.
chewing that gum and they were having knee pain, as a consequences of the artificial sweeteners in the gum. And
Wow.
most gums have artificial sweeteners. Some even the big box companies claim xylitol, but they still have aspartame in there as a byproduct. And aspartame is a it's addictive, so it makes people want to chew their gum on a regular basis.
That the
So
biggest one is aspartame.
aspartame goes down that road. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, in general, fermented products, make up my own words, fermented products. Again, like soy sauce is a biggie. Some of the spices, artificial natural flavors is another one that is on the top of the list, a very common source. So when you see that, basically, again, we're talking about packaged processed products, right? So that's the person having trouble falling asleep. It's easier when they're having trouble falling asleep on a random basis or here and there, because then that gives us the opportunity to journal or log what we did or what we ate on those days, what we did different that caused us to not sleep well. That's a little easier to determine. If they're sorry, sorry to throw out the scare there, but if they're not falling asleep on a daily basis, look, it's a nutrient like magnesium, but we may be needing to look at brain neurodegeneration. Are you still suffering from, PTS, post-traumatic stress disorder, or, did you have a gnarly concussion or auto accident where you had the brain slap in the airbag opened? That's going to damage the brain. And we need to do products like Great Minds with lithium to help rebuild those. Make sure you're on a good omega-3 to quench some of that inflammation in the brain and protect the brain. Mhm.
I also find that people who are having that need for glutamate to GABA conversion support are usually low in vitamin B6. B6 is a
Yeah,
big piece that I figure I check for. I like min checks, honestly, from Standard Process for the B6 that's in there. So also for
nice.
minerals, and I can find that that can help compensate for a lack of that. What other nutrients do you find are typically missing in that?
B6 and zinc are the two biggies for making GABA ultimately. And so again, GABA is what shuts it down so that we can go to sleep,
Mhm.
for sure. So yeah, those are biggies. Looking at that methylation pathway, B12 actually also is crazy as it is. B12 is known for creating energy, but
Uh-huh.
one of the other mechanisms, B12 and magnesium, are two nutrients to convert serotonin to melatonin. So that
Right.
gets us into that deep sleep. So it's a very similar mechanism. So we should probably talk about, go ahead. You got
Yeah,
another
let's gonna
subject.
just to close the loop on that actual aspect of the glutamate to GABA one. I know that a lot of times people use kava for its GABAergic,
Mm,
relaxation
nice.
technique.
Right.
Sometimes people don't get the results with kava, right? So they don't believe that kava works. And my question would be, did you make sure that they have all of those nutrients to help with the conversion, right? Because
Right.
though you're putting kava in there, if you're still having an issue, number one, clearing the excess glutamate from the glial cells, and number two, having the zinc and the magnesium and the B6 to help make that conversion, the kava may be giving you a mediocre result, right? So
hmm
it's
hmm
not working. It's just not working within the chemistry set that you've given it to play with, right?
Right,
So
right.
yeah, so that can
And is
sometimes be
it,
a good help.
and what was it a good form of kava, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, MediHerb talks about it needing to be water extracted,
Mhm.
right? So So yeah, was it? Yes, that's a big subject, isn't it?
Right, right. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, so it could definitely be a bad form of it too. But I always want to remind anybody who's using herbs and they're getting results or not getting results, I would always go back and revisit what chemistry set that they're putting the herbs into play with, right? Because
Hmm. Hmm.
that doesn't mean the herb doesn't work. It just means that you've even given it everything it needs to function optimally. The herb,
Yeah, or that wasn't the mechanism at play. That
right.
wasn't the short circuit.
So let's talk about that person next, the one who can't get to sleep every night, right? So what are your
Right.
first thoughts about that person who tells you every night I sit there and I just stare at the ceiling and so I whatever they get up
Right.
and come back to bed or
Yeah,
something.
I mean, we kind of covered it with the first place I started is magnesium, and you
Mhm.
talked about kava, things like that to shut it down. Cortisol, is their cortisol rhythm backwards, or is their cortisol not breaking down properly, right? Cortisol, with cortisol, serotonin often mimics that. So serotonin's going to be high, and that's going to cause us to, again, be still awake and
Right.
looking at the ceiling. Similar mechanism to setting up the frontal headaches. So if they also have frontal headaches or anxiety, then I'd be looking at high cortisol or improper cortisol rhythm where their cortisol's up at night instead of being up in the morning. Cortisol, if those are unfamiliar with it, cortisol should be at its highest to get us up and out of bed in the morning and at its lowest at midnight, right? So cortisol's the up and atom, let's go conquer the world hormone. And if that rhythm gets backwards, we get, as part of jet lag, if the circadian rhythm gets out of whack, then we have trouble. One of the great ways to stimulate that or get back on with the circadian rhythm is light in the eyes. There's that mechanism in the eyes to say, okay, up and at 'em, here's the sunlight, it's time to get going. So the green blue hues of the sun, of the grass, the sun coming up and so on, that stimulates cortisol, whereas the orange red hues of sunset is we get that into the eyes, that tells the brain it's time to settle down and go to sleep. So that's part of how we could even use light or use the rhythms that God has created in the world to tell us to calm down, keep that mechanism working.
So a lot of times people will think, well, high cortisol at night, which it could be, like you said, inverted because of adrenals, right? That could be a sign of
Yes, and
being totally burnt out and very, very tired. So a lot of times people, a healthcare practitioner may reach for ashwagandha, right? Because ashwagandha can help
right.
lower those. But is that enough, right? Is
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
that going to actually heal why the cortisol's high at night? I mean,
Right.
what are your thoughts on that?
Maybe we need to do that to get them back into rhythm,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, in that case, I would say try to get some sun in the morning, try to retrain your circadian rhythm that
Yep.
way. Careful what you're eating at night. Don't shut it down at least 3 hours before you go to, going to bed,
Mhm.
so that you're not in that digestive mode or, stimulating, creating energy. All that comes into play.
Definitely, definitely. And of course, I think there's a lot of missing minerals just to help people relax at night in general, right? I,
Fantastic point. Mhm.
I've told, and I've given you credit every time for it. This thought of being mineralized, being like a rock, right, where nothing can move you. You're just calm, and you could go to sleep if you wanted to, right? Or if you don't have enough minerals, you're like a sponge, right? So
Right.
you're gonna be knocked around by everything. So
Hmm. Hmm.
that's an important point for those individuals who are having a hard time falling asleep every night too.
Right, right.
And
So
maybe
gallbladder does a lot of its prepping for detoxification, 11 to 1. So
okay.
if your gallbladder's not working, that's another potential mechanism where you trouble falling asleep. Other symptoms of poor gallbladder function is pain behind the right knee, right-sided headache, dry
Mm.
skin on the heels, sluggish digestion, constipation, bloating, a stitch if you're, when you run or ride,
Ah,
cycle, that's a sign of gallbladder problems.
okay.
So those are some kind of overt signs that, hey, gallbladder might be the reason you're having trouble falling asleep as well. Mhm.
Some of your top three things for people to take to help nourish their gallbladder back to being a better
Yeah,
function.
beets, right? They have beta food,
Sure.
get the bile flowing. So eating beets, you mentioned B6 helps methylation is one of the primary pathways in the liver to help us make bile, to get that flowing, to lower our cholesterol and have the precursors for hormones. We've talked about cholesterol in a previous podcast, and the natural ways to solve that. But keep eating good fats, that causes that gallbladder to contract and cleanse and go through its cycle. So that, as I did, in the, I think 80s, the fat phobic sort of mentality of like my diet was typically less than 5 or 10% of fat in my diet because that
Mm.
was, during that whole season of, oh, fat creates fat. And so I'm a bodybuilder. I don't want to eat fat. I want to be lean. And
Right,
so
right.
then we store everything we eat as fat instead, and don't have the building blocks to make energy and hormones. So eat the good fats. Again, fish, yeah, avocados if you're, A blood type and or AB blood type. That's a good source of omega-3s as well. But most of us need the omega-3s in our diet to cleanse that, to squeeze that gallbladder and keep it flowing.
Let's spin off of that just for a second, this omega-3 thing, because I was just reminded as you're saying that this weekend, I have this lady who in Malibu, she's a personal trainer. She does all this working out for everybody. And all the people on the GLP-1s are losing their butt, right? They don't have
Mhm.
anymore. And she was asking me about that. And of course, I talked to her about them not getting enough protein, right, to keep
Mm,
those muscles strong. And most people are losing more protein on those. But I also pointed out to her the importance of fats because if they're not eating proteins, they're not eating fats either.
mhm,
That's
mhm.
another thing for all of those people. I'd be curious to see how the sleep is getting dysregulated on people who are on these GLP-1s for long. I would pay attention to that for
Great
sure,
point.
right? Because
Right, right.
it's going to confuse your hypothalamus and it's going to make, the whole circadian rhythm thing a little bit more difficult when it comes to that. But yeah,
Indeed.
that
Mm.
probably going to, especially if you're trying to get to sleep between, would you say 11 or
11 and 1. Mm.
11 and 1? Okay.
If that's a rough time. Right, right. So then we go to 1 to 3 is liver.
Uh-huh.
So let's kind of we got to talk about melatonin a little bit more too, but let's go there.
Let's go
Just to
there.
just
Well,
to
first of
wrap
all,
up the
melatonin can't surge in the presence of cortisol, right? Too much
exact
cortisol.
right,
That's got
right,
to drop
right.
before melatonin can surge. And
So the sun goes down, we get the red orange hues of sunset, stimulates melatonin production, which is part of why you want to use the blue light blocking if you shouldn't be on the computer late at night and that sort of stuff. But blue light, blocking on your screen, again, because blue light stimulates cortisol, we want to try to shut it down to go to sleep. In the presence of melatonin, the brain actually shrinks, which is a good thing. The melatonin causes the brain to shrink to allow the glymphatic system. Think of lymphatics, right? When we exercise, that pumps fluid through the brain, through the body to heal it. Same mechanism that when the brain during sleep, the brain shrinks to allow things to cleanse, allow that brain to cleanse and heal and rebuild while we sleep. Melatonin stimulates all that. So that's part of why melatonin is very somewhat anti-cancerous, if you will, because it helps us heal, rebuild, regenerate, heal the liver, the brain while we're sleeping.
okay. I just want to mention really quickly, well, because I know we got a little bit of time left. I'm going to get through all of these times of waking up at night. But we
Yep.
were just talking earlier. I want to share with this with anybody who's really struggling out there is that we are going to be doing these sleep retreats. The crazy wellness retreats are starting, and the ultimate sleep one is coming up in March 6th through 8th. And this is where we're going to talk about all that stuff, getting people up in the morning, getting their bare feet on the ground with the sun rising, getting the not only the nighttime routines and rituals as enhanced and perfected as possible for that individual, but also the morning routine. Because I keep hearing you talking about that, making sure that the right light is getting you. So we're going to be compiling all the things that we've learned about this to see if in one weekend we can get people to get their sleep back to an awesome state, like
Right,
Dr.
right.
Sleep. That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah, and that's a great point because every time we keep going, oh well, that's a whole nother subject, and here we are trying to cover it in about a half an hour with. I mean, sleep is a combination of probably 10 different subjects ultimately.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Maybe we should
so
break it down into waking up at this time at night, whole podcast dedicated to that one. Because you were just getting into
right.
liver, right? You were just getting into
So we talked about liver. Yeah, liver is 1 to 3. So if you're having trouble staying asleep or you're waking up between 1 and 3 in the morning, that means your liver is struggling. So listen to some of the podcasts we've done on that. That's a massive, massive, massive subject. But if you're having trouble falling asleep and then waking up between 1 and 3, that's certainly going to be sulfation. That's the main pathway in the liver that breaks down those excitatory neurotransmitters we talked about previously. So just as we've got a lot to talk about and we're running out of time. So 1 to 3 is liver, 3 to 5 is lung. So if you went through a season of grief and you've been having trouble sleeping ever since loss of a loved one or that sort of thing, grief is a primary emotion of the lungs and large intestine. Large intestine, incidentally, is 5 to 7. So if this whole second half of your night is compromised, lungs, large intestine are where we want to consider. Often that means there's a big emotional component because they are in acupuncture, they're both similar in their emotional grief, sadness, yearning. Again, this big loss scenario. Use homeopathics for when it's that whole second half of the night that's compromised. If you have a cough or you've had trouble sleeping ever since COVID or something, a lung infection that affected the lung, then you want to heal that lung, restore, rebuild that lung. Or if there's mold in your house.
Just gonna say, could that be a sign that there's mold if you're waking up between 5 and 7 every day, coughing, whatever? So
Right.
that means you may need to do some things to help get the
And the
right plants
follow
in the room that help clear out mold and get some
right.
filters and all of those things.
Right. So the follow-up question to that, is it better when you go away? So if they
Yeah.
go on vacation and they sleep through that 3 to 5 time frame, then we know, voila,
Ah,
you got mold in the house, unfortunately. And it may take a few days to clear it because that mold still can be brewing in the lungs while they're gone.
right.
But yeah, that's a way to kind of self-correct or self-identify if that
Ooh,
is a
sounds like we need
trigger.
to do a whole episode on mold, brother.
There's another one. I'm adding it to our list here.
Yeast. Well, you said yeast. We were going to talk about yeast, but yeast and mold, I think we can cover them both in the same topic. Sounds
Yeah,
good.
yeah, that'll work.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So we covered we covered the time frames. Oh, random. So if they're waking up at random times during the night, or they're not able to stay asleep for more than 10 hours, or excuse me, more than 8 hours,
How much
10
sleep
hours
you
to
getting every night?
be.
Beautiful.
So if they can't stay asleep at least 6 hours, there's more than likely blood sugar issues. If they're waking up at a random time at night, that typically tells us the canned answer there is the more times you wake up, the more unstable blood sugar is
Wow.
ultimately.
Okay.
So I use that as a relative objective measure of, okay, when they first see me, they're waking up every 2 hours, their blood sugar is a mess. And what's happening is the mechanism there is the blood sugar is dipping too low. Crisis for the brain. The brain's only energy source is glucose. So that blood sugar dips. It's the brain's where it gets notified. And it's like, ooh, feed me now. It's ultimately the alarm that's being sounded when they're waking up around at multiple times like that. So we need to stabilize, get more protein in the diet, more good fats, take an herb like Jim Niebuhr, things like that to help stabilize that. Stabilize that blood sugar. Sometimes I have patients taking the protein food at nighttime.
Yeah.
Use that as amino acids to help keep, because that's also some of the amino acids in that protein food stimulate growth hormone, which is also what needs to go on while we sleep and restore. So taking some protein food before bed is a way to potentially stabilize that waking up multiple times during the night.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Yep. We're gonna have to come back to this. This is too much. We haven't touched on people sleeping too long. We haven't touched on, there's so many aspects of this. So, but you've
Right.
got to
Immune
go save the
function.
world.
Say it again, sorry.
You've got to go save the world. So we can't keep you here all day.
That's
Thank,
funny.
thanks everybody for watching. If you have more questions specific about sleep, please put them in the comments. Yeah, we're going to probably come back to this, talk more specifically about ways to help not only understand what your sleep is telling you about your health, but also what you can do about it so you can get back to sleeping like Dr. V sleeps every night. And I will be eventually once I get to bed. Thank you all for watching. We appreciate your support, and hopefully this was eye-opening for some of you and gave you some things you can do. And we'll see. Well, you'll be seeing us in the next podcast.
And